Everyone, it looks like we're broadcasting live now. We want to welcome you to our session, and what we're going to be talking about is digital equity and inclusion. And so as we get ready to start, we're going to start with introductions. My name is Michelle Martinez Vega. I'm the Chief Technology Strategist here at IDRA, and I have more than 20 years of experience in designing, developing, and administering professional development for educators at the state, regional, and district levels. My work is based in the desire to improve academic achievement through the use of technology. In addition to my technology role at IDRA, I'm privileged to work with my IDRA colleagues on both the Chief Science Officers Program, a student voice, student-led initiative, and the Valued Youth Partnership Program, a cross-age tutoring student leadership program. And I also serve on the Digital Inclusion Alliance of San Antonio Steering Committee. I'm joined today by my colleagues Thomas Marshall and Christina Quintanilla-Muñoz. And Christina, if you wouldn't mind, can you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Thomas for his introduction?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Christina Quintanilla-Muñoz. So I'm actually an Education Policy Fellow here at IDRA. I've been an Education Policy Fellow for about 9 months, so this is going to be our last month here with the organization. So a little background on me, I have received my Bachelor's of Arts at UTSA, or the University of Texas at San Antonio, in psychology. I recently received my Master's of Education in Educational Psychology with a specialization in quantitative methods. And currently I am a doctoral student at the University of Texas at San Antonio studying applied demography. So I'm really excited to be here with you this morning and talk to you a little bit more about our digital equity work and kind of the research that we produce during our fellowship and some of the policy recommendations we are hoping to share with you all.
Thank you so much, Christina. Good morning, everyone. Hello, my name is Thomas Marshall, and I'm also an IDRA Education Policy Fellow. It's a really cool program we're able to be a part of at IDRA. It's the inaugural Policy Fellows of Color program. So really excited to have people of color being involved in state policy, and did a lot of really cool work around digital equity throughout the year. A little bit of background on me. I'm originally from Columbia, South Carolina, and I just received a Bachelor's of Arts in English from Clemson University. And currently I'm a graduate student in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at University of Houston, studying to obtain my Master's in Education. So super excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So before we get started, what we'd like for you guys to do is, I was going to originally ask you to scan the QR code, but we're not going to do that. So what I'd like you to do is actually just go into the chat and tell us, how do you use the internet? So in a word, you can say work or entertainment, but if you don't mind, just drop it really quickly in the chat and let us know how you use the internet. And we'll give you a minute to do that. And if you're looking for the chat, it's over on the right. No takers? Okay.
Okay, so it looks like our chat is disabled. So let's see if we can troubleshoot that really quickly.
Well, if you want to go ahead and drop it into the Q&A, we can do that. So just go ahead and drop it into the Q&A. So it's a new platform, everyone. So we are getting used to it. These things happen, no worries. Okay, so we see work. Thank you, Maria. Research. Work, play, entertainment. So, and Tim says everything. So this was definitely the purpose of this exercise, was to get us to think about what we do on the internet and how prolific it is in our lives. So we'll move on to the next section. And so what we're going to talk about now is digital inclusion. So what is digital inclusion? Digital inclusion refers to the activities necessary to ensure that all individuals and communities, including the most disadvantaged, have access to and the use of information and communication technologies. So you may have heard of the 3 legs of the stool. The legs of the stool are access, devices, and literacy. And all 3 are needed to actively participate in the digital economy and online learning. So just like a stool, if you're missing one, then the stool is not stable. All right, so what is the digital divide? The digital divide refers to the gap between people who have access to broadband services and know how to use the internet and those who do not have such access or knowledge. So who's on the wrong side of the digital divide? Low-income people, rural populations, those with less formal education, the elderly, and the minorities. So for households with broadband subscriptions across multiple devices, such as a laptop or a desktop or a smartphone or a tablet, incomes above $150,000 per year have a rate of 80%, and households with incomes under $25,000 per year have a rate of 20%. So just with that statistic there, we see that people that are more affluent obviously have access, and the people that aren't do not. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. And so what is digital equity? Digital equity states that all individuals and communities have the information, technology capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. Digital equity is necessary for civic and cultural participation, employment, lifelong learning, and access to essential services. So digital equity is the goal. Digital inclusion is the how. All right, so I'm going to show a quick little video, and let me just navigate to the video.
Welcome to today's academic challenge. You may only use what's on your table. There will be 3 rounds, and the questions will get harder. What is the largest animal living today? Team A.
Blue whale.
Team B.
Blue whale.
That is correct. What is the square root of 144?
12.
Correct.
India.
Neil Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong.
William
Shakespeare.
Correct. We are tied. For round 2, we're going to give both teams some additional resources.
Okay.
Who was the first president to live in the White House?
John Adams.
That is correct. What does the acronym LCD stand for?
Liquid crystal display.
Correct.
Go with it. Just go with it.
Sargasso Sea.
That's correct.
8 minutes and 20 seconds.
Correct.
Samuel Morse.
Correct.
Denver, Colorado. Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Salt Lake City, Utah.
That is correct. Let's pull back the curtain.
Are you kidding me? so not cool. But I'm offended that they had such an unfair advantage. It was way too fast.
Please have your team captain open the envelope on the table.
70% of teachers assign homework requiring access to the internet, and yet 5 million households with school-age children do not have high-speed internet service at home. That just puts 5 million other people at a disadvantage, which is not okay.
Nearly 50% of students say they have been unable to complete a homework assignment because they did not have access to the internet or computer.
I didn't know that the percentage was so high. Everything he does is on the computer. So if he didn't have access to it, he would have a chance. Someone may not be pulling the grade not because they're not smart. They just don't have access to what all the other kids have. Oh, that's so great.
So I hope you enjoyed that video. What strikes me most about that video is the fact that those kids are so defeated. You see them as they're losing the competition and they just look like the wind's been knocked out of them. And that is a feeling that no one wants, right? So, as educators, we do definitely want to keep in mind that when we're assigning homework or for the students that may not have internet, what can we do to ensure that they're still learning and that they still have access to the quality resources that they need to have access to. But more importantly, it's important that we bridge the digital divide. So we're going to go ahead and move on to my next question. And again, just put it in the Q&A. So what device do you normally use for work? So do you use a computer, a phone, or a tablet?
And Michelle, we actually have the chat function enabled now, so folks can also drop things in the chat section.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. So yeah, just let us know, what device do you normally use? And the reason that we're asking this question is because there are a lot of kids out there that only have access to a phone. And so when I see your responses here that mostly it's a computer or a tablet, and you need that real estate of a screen to be able to work and to really get a quality product out. The cell phone's great, but it's not going to allow you to really have the real estate that you need to write a good paper or to do the research that you need and do your homework. So again, that's just another exercise in just understanding what we do and what works for us, and then being compassionate to those that don't have what they need. And so I'm going to actually pass on this presentation to Christina, and she's going to go over the next section.
So we're wondering who the divide impacts, right? So it's historically marginalized and low-income communities who are most often impacted by the digital divide. So this includes families who may only be able to afford cell service, but no internet service, families with only one or no devices in the home, and families who live in redlined communities. So the digital divide is one of the most pervasive equity issues plaguing students, as we've kind of are learning about this right now, impacting both rural and urban school districts alike. So in 2019, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, or NDIA, found that approximately 75% of the 20 million U.S. households who still lack home broadband or mobile data connections live in urbanized areas. So these families are also more likely to be earning low incomes. So while rural communities experience the poor broadband infrastructure, many urban communities, particularly communities where students of color live, bear the brunt of the systemic issue. So broadband infrastructure in urban areas could be established, and most often is. However, access to these critical internet services is what remains the issue. Internet service providers circumvent neighborhoods they see as being profitable by failing to lay what's called the last mile for proper connectivity. So this means that the legacy of redlining will persist in those communities. So until internet access is seen and interpreted as a utility, or local governments having a stake in telecommunications, communities who are affected by the divide will be at the whim for those for-profit companies who control access to broadband internet services through connectivity, but also affordability. So here, as demonstrated in the table developed by Pew Research Center, survey research in 2018, students of color are disproportionately impacted by the lack of household internet services and household technological devices. So as demonstrated here, we can see that Black, Latinx, and lower income students are more likely to use public internet and their cell phones to complete their schoolwork, which is definitely not very viable when you're wondering about how prominent the device is in the use of homework. So the same students are also more likely to not complete their homework, which requires internet access often. So according to the most recent data from the National Center for Education Statistics, or NCES, 14% of children aged 13 to 18 don't have internet access at home. So this means more than 9 million school children will face difficulty completing assignments online, similarly to how we saw in the video. So in addition to home internet, the lack of a laptop or a desktop computer on which to complete schoolwork is another barrier, another challenge to full participation in remote learning. So among children aged 13 to 18, 17% live in households without a laptop or desktop computer. So at least 11 million students don't have a computer for online learning at all. So in addition to those that may need to share a single device with siblings, this is just another barrier. Lack of access to home internet or computer increases for lower income students. So in October of 2020, the Texas Education Agency, or TEA, reported that more than 600,000 Texas public school students, which is over 1 in 10 students, did not complete assignments or respond to teacher outreach in spring 2020 or at the start of the COVID pandemic during that pivot to remote online classroom instruction. So that means that 1 in 10 students lost that connection to their own classroom. Texas public schools lost touch with Black students and Latinx students at over twice the rate of white students. So this shows that the shift to remote learning was an even demonstrated even deeper rifts among really deep-rooted educational inequities that are included in school funding, technological resources, and connectivity, the ways schools engage families. And this is true in districts serving large populations of students of color, emergent bilingual students, and students from households with low incomes. So in many parts of Texas, diminished student engagement was seen to be a direct result of limited internet access during the transition to remote learning. So in May of this year, IDRA released an issue brief titled Plugged In, Tuned Out, in which we explore the student engagement patterns in Texas public schools at the start of the COVID pandemic. So the Public Education Information Management System, a long term kind of shortened to what's called PEMS, crisis codes developed by the TEA, characterize student engagement as completion of assignments, responsiveness to teacher and school outreach, and participation in virtual classrooms by logging on during COVID. And this definition was quite narrow in terms of placing the onus on students rather than a measure of a school's engagement of these students. So according to PEMS code, students completing assignments in one or more of content areas were counted as engaged if they were responding to the teacher outreach or school administration outreach. But students who responded to teacher and school administration outreach but did not complete assignments were coded as unengaged. So schools reported student engagement across instructional venues, so on-campus learning, remote learning, and both synchronous and asynchronous methods. So I wanted to kind of show these two graphs here from our report and a little bit more about this report. To explore the digital divide impact on student engagement during the pandemic, we looked at the relationship between the student engagement patterns at the start of the pandemic in spring 2020 and compared that to the access to broadband internet services prior to the pandemic. So we were seeking 3 questions. Number 1, what is the pandemic's impact on Texas public school enrollment? Number 2, the relationship between district size, student engagement patterns across Texas school districts during the 2019-2020 school year when COVID hit. And then 3rd, what the relationship was between broadband internet access in these districts and the student engagement patterns that these districts demonstrated. So we studied the data from the engagement patterns from the start of the spring 2020 school year and paired that with an analysis of Texas students' broadband access from the U.S. Census Bureau American Community Survey estimates on the presence and type of internet subscriptions in households within school districts. And what we saw in the final analysis of this data demonstrates that broadband internet access was a significant predictor of full student engagement for larger, more urban school districts. So this kind of demonstrates a few takeaways. Number 1, that the digital divide continues to impact education and widen the homework gap, specifically for students who live in rural regions, which are, again, high population densities of students of color, emergent bilingual students included. And then 2nd, while standards of student engagement developed by state education agencies are often narrow as educators, scholars, and advocates, we must consider the engagement of students as an indicator of a quality school based on, the environment, the activities that value your students and incorporate them to engage in the learning process and other school activities to increase that sense of belonging. And that's just a part of what a high quality school would look like, including academic achievement and, again, increased engagement of students. But through the previous critical report that we kind of demonstrated just in the prior slide, demonstrating the association between the access to broadband internet services and student engagement, IDRA developed key policy recommendations that we actually took to the Texas legislature this year. And they're displayed here for you to see, but for Texas policymakers to address these education concerns, first we had to kind of address the elephant in the room that there was no state broadband plan to address these equity concerns in schools. And so these, again, represent ways that policymakers can address the concerns that COVID definitely raised as related to the digital divide and its impact on student engagement. But furthermore, the research informed a lot of these recommendations. First and foremost, the research informed a very vital amendment recommendation for Texas's omnibus broadband bill, which developed this session to include an urban independent school district representative on the council who makes these decisions. This ultimately passed, and this demonstrates just another way that the digital divide not only impacts rural communities, urban communities, and therefore there needs to be representation within those leadership groups who make the decisions about responding to these access issues. Additionally, IDRA recommended that the integration of more precise granular level data ensured that the council would go beyond relying on census block data, which ultimately underrepresents and undercounts households with connectivity issues. And doing this would determine connectivity issues for households across Texas. So they identify the correct number of households who lack broadband internet access and connectivity so that direct attention can be made to these underserved communities. Next, digital literacy is an integral component of digital-based learning and ensures students have the knowledge and safety to effectively use computer devices, navigate online programs, access safe, credible sources of information on the internet as part of their relationship to their device and their digital learning experience. And financial support for these digital literacy programs definitely would help communities remain connected and knowledgeable about online networks. And then lastly, IDRA's research informed the recommendations behind the investment in sustainable long-term student and family engagement programs that would work to foster authentic communication between schools and families to really create accessible pathways for the engagement of students and families, encourage healthy relationships with students and their learning, and ultimately rebuild positive relationships with students, families, and to their schools. So a lot of these recommendations you can learn more about. This is a plug about these recommendations and practical strategies for the implementation of such engagement plans in a session that will occur later this afternoon at 1:30 during this EAC convening. So now I'll turn over this presentation to my colleague Thomas to talk a little bit more about what you as EAC members can help with.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christina. I really want to appreciate how she went over a lot of really great research, and a lot of this research that we were able to do throughout our time here at IDRA is really a springboard for how we talk about digital inclusion and equity, and how we're able to really center students on this issue. So before I go into my presentation, I really want to hone in on that. So during my section, I'm going to be going over the state of the states. So I'll be dissecting the various states that are in IDRA's EAC-South region, providing some statistics, some history on digital redlining, and some ways to advocate currently. And just to clarify on the states we'll highlight today, it's going to be Alabama, Arkansas, the District of Columbia or DC, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. Alrighty, so currently you're looking at a map of broadband access by households. This data comes from the American Community Survey, and in another survey from the Federal Communications Commission, there was an estimated 14 million people without internet access and 25 million without the faster or more reliable broadband access, according to that 2018 FCC study. Today I'll reference the Federal Communications Commission, and sometimes I'll notice it by FCC, and just to let you know, those are some of the terms that I'll be using. And so that's probably actually an undercount, just like Christina was saying a bit earlier. There are really interesting ways that the Federal Communications Commissions or FCC collects this data. They use census block data, which is the smallest geographic unit used by the United States Census Bureau for tabulation of 100% data. So this is data collected from all houses rather than just a sample of houses. So at first, it sounds like a really great idea, but because of this, census block data cannot cover hundreds of households. And the FCC will recognize one area where those sample of houses is being served or having internet access only based on one household in that entire area. So that ends up leading to thousands and then millions of houses being able to be undercounted that don't have access to broadband. As well, in this map, you will see some of the darkest green parts of it that represent the households with over 74% coverage, which, as you can see, there are some trends within the northern states and the southern states. As you go towards the bottom of the United States, you will see the trends change. There's going to be more red, more orange, and more tan-colored squares because of these communities with only up to 60% of broadband internet access coverage. This map that we're looking at is not a coincidence. It's really because of the severe systemic effects of digital redlining. If you've not heard this phrase, I know many people on the call may have heard of redlining. It's very similar to the historic redlining that you've heard before. Just to give some background, redlining, of course, is the systematic denial of various services to residents of specific, often racially associated neighborhoods or communities, either explicitly or through the selective raising of prices. So we remember housing discrimination, bank loans, things like that, and primarily in Black urban communities. Today, I'm going to introduce you into digital redlining. Digital redlining is the practice of creating and perpetuating inequities between already marginalized groups, specifically through the use of digital technologies, digital content, and the internet. The concept of digital redlining is an extension of the practice of redlining. So in the next slide, you'll start to see how this is played out throughout the years. So this map, as you see, shows where race and minority groups are highly represented by county. So in the orange, you'll see this represents Black folks. The darkest green color represents Hispanics, and the lighter green is for folks who identified with two or more minorities. As you can see, stretching all across the American South are where we see a huge portion of Black, Latinx, and other ethnic and racial minorities residing. Comparing the map from this previous slide, what are some things that you see? And also feel free to drop things in the chat or some different similarities that you see within these maps. The same communities that are impacted by having low or underserved areas of broadband, those who lack access, are the same groups of people who have been disenfranchised, marginalized, and pushed out of their own community for years. This is an obvious systemic issue that has plagued marginalized communities or communities of color that we've seen extended to the classroom here in Texas. In Texas, some numbers that we were able to pull from another brief that we did called Digital Destination, for Black or low-income students, they reported having less access to computers, basic internet, and broadband access. Black students in Texas face substantial barriers, with a lower proportion of households with school-aged children having access to the internet, computers, as well as broadband, and combined access for both broadband and a computer. And these numbers were put up against their white counterparts. And we saw the same trends with Latinx students. They also reported low numbers of these racial disparities, as well as their white counterparts fared significantly better in broadband internet access and even devices and computers at home. The reason for some of these connectivity gaps are also based on region. A lot of times internet companies who provide internet for folks in these communities all across the country will make assumption about these bigger urbanized areas, like Christina was saying a bit earlier. We sometimes make the assumption thinking that everyone has access due to them living in an urban area or a bigger city. But unfortunately, that's a form of structural racism. As Christina mentioned, that the National Digital Inclusion Alliance did a brief on that, talking about the way we frame the situation as only being a rural-only issue is structurally racist. Urban cities like Atlanta, Detroit, Houston, cities where Black folks flock to after post-Reconstruction, are a lot of these areas that have been overlooked when determining gaps in access. Black Americans are some of the highest rates of no broadband in the home all across the country. So on this next slide, thanks to Michelle, she was able to create this heat map for us to show everyone in their respective states. Utilizing American Community Survey data and data from the Pew Charitable Trust, she was able to create a map that shows us the latest rates of broadband internet subscription and broadband adoption rankings all across the nation. As we know, data is not perfect. It's constantly changing, but I cannot underestimate how important the mapping is so we can identify who needs access, so then we can shift to getting our families and students connected to the internet. A shift that we've seen here in Texas, and even more locally in the San Antonio area, are digital inclusion alliances. Digital inclusion alliances are basically when a group of folks will get together and attempt to create community solutions by the community to identify who needs access. By leveraging strategic partnerships with the city to establish higher quality internet services, all this using a community-focused approach. I've always said this about this issue. Communities already know what they need. It's our job as digital equity advocates to center them and amplify their voices and get them the resources that they need. I encourage you all to check into your city and see if they have a digital inclusion alliance. A great way to start off, we'll reference this website a lot, is the National Digital Inclusion Alliance website. They have a lot of really great tools to get involved, to really understand the digital inclusion landscape, as well as if your city has a digital inclusion alliance already and how to start one. We'll show this later, so you all can kind of hover over and see your state to see where it is based on broadband connectivity. All right, so lastly, before I pass it back off, I wanted to give a legislative update. Our job, me and Christina, as policy fellows, have been able to work with the Texas legislator and be able to provide recommendations on digital equity and inclusion and seeing how we can really center public education within that. So I want to give an update across all the EAC-South states and identified internet access gaps and how a lot of those state legislators have made some really great steps on the policy side of things to fix that. If you're really interested in your respective state in terms of digital equity, I'll have another plug. We'll have a digital equity gallery walk tomorrow where we can really go in depth about what your state is doing. But generally, state legislators have been doing a lot of things to their respective states since the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen broadband internet access be a top priority for policymakers all across the country, and numerous bills have been filed throughout the southern region. So now I'm going to head over to our brochure, where you're able to take a look and see some of the states that we were able to highlight. And I'll kind of go over a couple things for each state. I'm just talking about ways we can get a call to action. So a general call to action that we'll say for each state is currently right now, the Federal Communications Commission is offering a discount on monthly home broadband services. So if you know of anyone in your community that could qualify for this, if you navigate over to the FCC website, or if you Google emergency broadband benefit, you'll be able to understand some of the ways that you're able to pass this along to families or folks in your school districts. So to start out, Alabama had some recent legislation and was able to pass the Alabama Digital Expansion Authority Act. So able to oversee the expansion of broadband to a lot of areas and be able to start some really critical steps to be able to make sure that broadband is a priority. We saw in Arkansas, another bill that was passed established a broadband improvement district. So different districts all across Arkansas that were seen as underserved or needed more broadband internet access. They were able to pass a bill to make sure they incentivize internet companies to be able to provide access for those places. In the District of Columbia, a couple bills that are not passed, but we're still in the stalling points. But in any type of legislative work, I think it's really important to notice that bills being filed is a really important step to be able to get some of these key ideas out here. So even if a bill does not pass for a certain session, it can be refiled for the next session and can still be worked on. So a lot of that community building is a really important part of just seeing these bills even come to fruition and just getting them on paper. So they had two really cool bills that required a multi-year technology plan for all District of Columbia schools to support that quality and equitable education, as well as to amend an office of a chief technology officer and to actually create a digital equity division within their already current broadband office. In Florida, they created some new provisions for their broadband office. They were able to really expand it, the administration of the program, provide a lot more requirements and a lot more awards. What's really important to note is it's important that every single state have a statewide broadband office, because that's how they're able to get federal funds directed to them, so we can get broadband internet access to different schools and entities like hospitals and telemedicine, but especially our school districts. And so it's really important that states are advocating for that state broadband office. So some more expansions from Florida. In Georgia, we saw a bill provide for more planning and development and the incentivizing of broadband services. You'll see these words a lot. A lot of these bills will have incentives for internet companies to come in, because previously that's why a lot of these folks and communities have been left out, because they have not been properly taken care of due to the years of historical redlining, as well as just being looked over a lot of times. So it gives the internet service providers incentive to be able to come in and put broadband wires within the communities. As well as Louisiana, they had a bill to create a grant program to build out some more expansion, even build out more municipalities for different cities across the state of Louisiana, and that was passed. In Mississippi, we saw the T initiative of 2021, which was able to track students' enrollment and provide those additional resources like that high-speed broadband internet, the things that we know that our students need. If we go along to North Carolina, they would have also established, unfortunately it was not able to pass, but established a $250 million non-recurring funds for eligible families and low-income families for broadband internet access. A lot of times we don't talk about this, but broadband is a affordability issue as well. Just because you're able to see broadband wires in your community doesn't mean that everyone is able to pay for it. And so the things like the emergency broadband benefit that we talked about earlier are really cool, really crucial programs and government programs that need to continue to be funded even after the pandemic and the American Rescue Plan. In South Carolina, my home state, there would have been a created Office of Broadband Development, which would have established a mapping system and a state-specific mapping system to see some of those underserved areas. As I showed the slides earlier, mapping is a crucial part of digital equity, and we have to know who has access and who doesn't. And so getting to that more granular data of mapping is really key. And states are stepping up to be able to make sure that they identify who has access and who does not. Tennessee, in their Broadband Accessibility Act, they provided grant funding as well, and did some more grant funding, which I think is a really cool opportunity for local libraries to help community members improve their digital literacy skills. Another part of this broadband internet access issue is digital literacy. We have to be sure that we're getting the proper training in digital literacy skills for folks to know how to navigate the internet. All right, and here in Texas, we've talked about this a lot, but HB5, as Christina alluded to earlier, was the huge omnibus broadband bill, established a statewide broadband office, access grants for different entities like a school or a hospital to apply. So if you're here in the Texas area, that's something you really want to make sure you keep up with as the statewide broadband office is developed, having to advocate for a digital equity officer, things like that in the future, as well as making sure those federal funds that are going to be dispersed are able to be dispersed to entities like schools. And lastly, in Virginia, a part of their special session that they're still working on, they would have created a digital equity pilot program, which would have been great for reimbursements for eligible households to offset the high cost of internet service. So those are a couple state-specific things that we went over, and I'll navigate back over to our slides. But like I said, tomorrow, if you really, really want to get into some more conversations about what your state can do and some ways that you can advocate, I'd love to be able to talk more at our gallery walk tomorrow. So I'll pass it back off to Michelle and Christina.
All right, so we heard a lot of information, a lot of statistics, and all of that is just to say that we know that a lot of students and a lot of households still do not have access to the internet, and they are being left out of the current digital and educational economy. So what can we do about it? Well, we can definitely do some equity audits. So IDRA has equity audits that we can go into your school district and go over a series of checks to make sure that your school district is doing everything that it can to be equitable to the students. You can also talk to your local representative and just kind of find out what their plans are. Especially if you live in a rural area, to find out what's available to you and when are things coming. So, your local representatives definitely want to hear that. They don't know that it's a problem until you speak up. Do you have anything that you'd like to add, Christina or Thomas, in regards to contacting your local representative?
Yeah, just knowing that it's a really important part of the advocacy process to make sure that you're contacting your local reps. They really want to hear from you to be able to understand this broadband issue, because it's one thing that everyone is really excited to take on now. So if this is probably a better time than ever to be able to start to really reach out to your local representatives so they're able to hear about those broadband internet access issues.
Yeah, and again, just to uplift, your lived experiences are not only important, they're necessary to bridging this digital divide. So definitely want to encourage you all as constituents to reach out to your local representatives to, again, identify the areas that are being affected most in your state.
Okay, so the next thing is you want to contact your local state education agency, local education agency, or your district. So if you're a parent that's watching this session and you're trying to figure out what's going on, a lot of school districts are deploying different, especially during this pandemic, they're deploying hotspots, they're deploying school buses that have hotspots. There's a lot of districts are being very proactive or have been very proactive over the past year and a half. So if you don't know what's going on in your area, contact your local school district and find out what's available for your student. And then that pretty much concludes our presentation. We want everyone to be excellent to each other. Bill and Ted said it so wonderfully. And, we want you guys to know that you have a friend in IDRA. IDRA is here to assist you. If you are wanting to find statistics like that wonderful brief that Christina and Thomas put together in regards to what the state of Texas looks like and the student, I'm missing the word. The student interactiveness, what is it, Christina? I know I'm missing the word and I just can't find it right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a buzzword lately, student engagement.
There you go. There you go. So yeah, so if you want to find out what student engagement is for your area, contact IDRA. Let us know. I mean, especially if you're in the EAC states. If you're in any of the EAC states, again, that's DC down to Florida over to Texas, then reach out to us and we can do a digital equity audit. We can do a student engagement look at your district or at the state level. So just please feel free to contact us. That's what we're here for. And that pretty much concludes our presentation. So we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A. So if you have any questions, please drop them either in the Q&A or chat, and one of us will answer that for you.
I guess as we wait for any questions that might come from participants in the Q&A or chat, I just wanted to get to uplift the importance of district family and student engagement plans. And so if you're really interested about learning more what those entail and what robust plans can look like, Thomas and I will be co-presenting a presentation later this afternoon to talk more about that. But again, those plans are really vital in really uncovering the issues that families are facing, specifically as they tie to digital divide issues. That is where the communication happens. That's where schools kind of learn their families' challenges and obstacles in helping their students facilitate their own learning. So again, please feel free to join that session this afternoon. We'll give some great information about what districts can do to support their families and students during this time and during the transition to school in the fall.
For sure. And I'll just plug our gallery walk again for tomorrow. I'm really excited for it. If you want to, I know I said a lot about a lot of the legislative things that are going on, and some things can be kind of confusing and figuring out how do I contact my representative or what does that process look like. We'll be more than happy to walk you through those steps and figure out ways that you can be a digital equity advocate. This is something that everyone's able to be a part of, no matter how small or big your contribution you'd want to look like, and something that affects everyone. So we'd love to be able to chat with you more tomorrow about that.
So there is one question. It comes from Sherry, and she wants to know, in regards to family engagement, how to support families, and can you give us a little preview? So, so we're actually going to have a session with Aurelio Montemayor and Terrence Wilson in the afternoon that talks about family engagement and how to increase support for families. So definitely check that out. But do you have any, do you guys want to, offer any information to that?
Definitely. I think that the main point is creating that robust two-way communication between schools and their families. So not just kind of issuing out updates or alerts to the families as a one-way communication through newsletters or emails, but really inquiring from the families, from the students themselves about what issues that they're experiencing and how the schools can help provide solutions for that or connect the families to solutions for that. So part of the objectives of the student family engagement plans that, yes, I can actually offer a quick preview of that. It's really about and centered in fostering those authentic relationships between the students, the families, and the school. And so that is really heavily relied on connection and the sense of belonging that the students and families have in their own schools, but also have the capacity and the space to share the concerns that they have with the acknowledgement of the school district, but also that the school districts and the schools and the school leadership really make a point to address those concerns through viable solutions. So it's about the communication, of course, the two-way process of communication, but again, identifying and addressing those key concerns that students and families are bringing to the school and the school leaders.
Thank you, Christina. That was wonderful. Okay, so we only have a couple of minutes left. And so I want to make sure that you guys know that there are some handouts. And so you should see on the right next to the chat or the Q&A a button that says handouts. And so we have our infogram there, as well as a newsletter brief that talks about the digital equity. We'll have more handouts during our equity walks that Thomas has plugged several times. Thank you, Thomas. And we just really appreciate that you guys took the time to spend with us this morning on this topic. It's definitely a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. We know that there's a gap, a homework gap. There's a digital divide. It was definitely exacerbated during the pandemic. And so, this is something that we really feel strongly about. And we're here to help. So if your school district needs any support, please reach out to us. If you go to our website, you'll find our number, also our contact information. I'm going to drop in the chat my email address. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to send me a message. And I think, and then the last thing is that we will have an evaluation. So as soon as this session is over, you're going to see a link for an evaluation. Please take the time to fill that out. It'll inform us on what we need to do going forward. And again, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Thomas. I couldn't have done it without you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone spending their time with us during the session today.
Yes, everyone enjoy the rest of the convening.